what makes for the highest performing teams in our businesses? And particularly, maybe if you're like a small to mid-sized business, how do you think about this? Well, Google actually answered that question. And I don't just mean typing it into Google. I mean the company Google, one of the most high performing competitive leadership development environments in like any business or organization in the world, set out to answer this question. And if you look around, it's actually over the last few years become a little bit harder to find this research, but thankfully I'm quite familiar with it. Their project was called Project Aristotle. And they picked the name Aristotle because Aristotle has a quote that says something like, "The whole is something more than the sum of the parts." And so these top executives and internal organizational researchers at Google wanted to understand when people or individuals come together and form teams, why is it that some of them are amazing, some of them are okay, and some of them struggle? So they took 150 different teams across the entire organization, and they assessed them in a few ways. So you had executive level, manager level, and team level. So you can kind of think of like top down, bottom up, and then middle level. And they also compared their performance to the projections for each team. What they found was rather interesting. That it wasn't who was on the team. It wasn't where they went to college. It wasn't their pay grades or where they sat in the organization or their technical expertise or their, who sat where in the organizational chart and how many managers they had and everything else. It was really just a couple things that predicted the best performing teams, and they were pretty much all psychological in nature of how those teams work together. So numbers kind of 2 and 3, the second most important things, were basically role clarity and dependability, which we can call that shared commitment or buy-in, right? So people knew what their job was, what was expected of them, and they had a high commitment to executing on that standards, and people were being held accountable, okay? The number one factor, though, that predicted high-performing teams was something that researchers now call psychological safety. Now, to keep it simple here in this video, you can think of that as trust, okay? So you feel a sense of connection and cohesion and collaboration with your team, you trust them. But this psychological construct, if we want to get a little bit more specific, is a sort of a specific type of trust. A type of trust in which you feel that an environment is safe for what researchers call interpersonal risk-taking. So that means I can try a new thing, I can ask a question, I can speak up, I can say, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing here, I need some help. Or, hey, why are we doing it this way? It seems like there's a better way to do it. That you can speak up, ask those questions, try those things, and if you fail, or you maybe ask a stupid question, you're not gonna get punished or kicked to the curb or made fun of or undermined. You're going to be supported. So you can start to see how those two things come together, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in this video, we are going to dive into the how to do this and why it matters, particularly if you are in a small to mid-sized business. How do you shape the culture and climate that creates the best performing teams? So let's get into that. Well, the first thing, as I said, is, well, how do you do this? And you have to first understand how those things I mentioned in the Project Aristotle study come together. Because if you just have trust and psychological safety and connection, but you don't have that buy-in, that accountability, that motivation and drive, you end up in kind of the comfort zone. It's like, hey, yeah, we're all friends here, we're family, it's all good, but we don't really care about getting results. So you don't want to be there. Now, at the same time, you can imagine that if you have intense standards and people taking ownership and a sense of shared commitment to execution, but you don't really trust one another and you're not very connected and collaborative, you kind of get like a toxic culture. So Harvard researcher Amy Edmondson has started to map this out. I want you to take a look at this visual because it can be quite powerful. So down here we have that buy-in. I'm going to put the SC there for shared commitment. And then up here you have that one trust, and I put a PS there for psychological safety. And so here's what I just said. When you have high trust and safety, but you don't really have the buy-in and shared commitment, you're in the comfort zone. Okay, you don't want to be there. Now, if you flip that and you have the high buy-in, without the trust, you get burnout. So we'll just put an X through both of those. And then I didn't even mention this, but obviously if you have both those things, like people don't work well together or trust one another, and they don't really care about getting results, then you're down here, which is terrible. You probably don't have a business. I don't know any organization really that's there, unless maybe you're working for like Congress or something where, everyone hates each other and we have no commitment to get things done for the people we serve. So anyway, you don't want to be there. But when you get both of those, you get in the learning zone. Think about that. People have a shared commitment to execution. They're bought in, they're driven, and they're in an environment where they feel like they can try and fail. They can ask questions, they can collaborate, they can admit vulnerability and seek input on ways of doing things better. And when those two things come together, you create an environment that feels like we're all learning together. We are learning how to be the best possible team or the best possible organization. And that is where you get the continuous improvement, the innovation, the productivity necessary to be one of these top performing teams. So let's break these down one at a time. Again, psychological safety. There's that feeling that environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. You have a feeling of trust and connection. The last thing I want to say about that before we get into the how is there's a metric called employee engagement, which comes from Gallup. It's a measure of interest and enthusiasm for one's work. If your employees say, I have a best friend at work, so that trust and connection, they are 700% more engaged. Think about that. 7x when it comes to their interest, enthusiasm, commitment, and motivation to their work. So these two categories aren't separate, right? They overlap. And so if you can create a climate of trust and connection where people build genuine friendships at work, it sounds like that's touchy-feely and, oh, we're not friends here, we're a business. That's short-sighted, and it overlooks the research across hundreds of organizations, thousands of employees, which shows that people will be more engaged and more productive and more successful if they feel that genuine connection with the people around them, that relatedness. So how do you create that? Well, Amy Edmondson, amongst some other researchers, she's sort of one of the world experts on this first psychological safety construct. She talks about it in terms of a few things. So number one, you gotta measure it, right? What gets measured gets managed. And you may think, well, how do you measure something that's kind of like a soft skill or soft stuff? You could literally just ask people. Like it's not rocket science, right? Like, hey, when there's an issue or a problem or something that could be done better in the business, like, how do you feel about bringing that up? Hey, when you're talking to me as the owner, let's say, or talking to your manager, do you feel safe to ask questions, try a new idea, speak up about what could be done better? Hey, would you say you have a best friend at work? On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the level of like caring and connection and trust you feel with your team? So you can just ask people or do a simple like 3-question survey around those things, right? So it might be something like 1 to 10 for each one. What's the level of trust and openness you have with your team? What's the level of trust and openness you have with your manager? And 1 to 10, I feel like on our team, we try new things, challenge the status quo, and have permission to fail in order to learn. Okay, right, whatever. So you get your baseline, and then you go from there. Then the 3 things I want you to think about in terms of your leadership style, and importantly, the leadership style that you develop amongst your senior management team and frontline management team, is going to be starting with vulnerability. So I want you to think about asking more questions and embracing vulnerability. And that's where you're going to start to get more of the feedback coming in. So you can imagine vulnerability could be something as simple as just like getting to know someone, or maybe asking them a bit of a personal question, or when they say, oh, hey, how's it going today? And you're having a bad day, you don't need to, trauma dump on them. Oh my God, I think I'm going to get a divorce and I'm 10 pounds overweight and my life is so terrible. Not quite what we mean when we're talking about leadership vulnerability. But you might say, hey, thanks for asking. Honestly, I feel I'm pretty behind this week and I'm not totally on top of things, but yeah, so wanted to get your input on maybe what we could do better as a team or something like that, right? It's just like being a human being. One of my earliest managers told me, as I was managing a team of like 16 people at a pretty large company, he said that trust is sort of like a bank account. You know, you have to make deposits before you make withdrawals. So start with vulnerability. And the way you can do that is asking more questions, leading with curiosity, and admitting that you don't have all the answers and that you're capable of making mistakes. That's especially true if you do make a mistake. You need to take ownership of that in a very clear way, underwriting your honest mistakes. Okay. The second part of that is actively seeking feedback. So kind of overlaps with what I just said about asking more questions, leading with curiosity. And the reason that's important is because you can think about starting a meeting like this. Hey, for the next week, I think these are 3 or 4 most important priorities. So Bob, I want you on top of that. Jessica, you're going to get the other one, and then I'll handle that third one. Sound good? But that's not terrible leadership by any means. But you can imagine saying, hey team, look, I know I don't have all the answers. And you remember that last project a couple months ago? Like, it ended up going pretty well, but there was a lot of things that I could have done better. So kicking off today, I think these are our 3 top priorities, but I just wanted to ask you, Bob and Jessica, and the rest of the team, what do you all think? And then what's going to happen is you're going to look so much better because Jessica's going to be like, oh, hey, Jackson, you're forgetting that urgent client proposal that we need to get done. And I'm going to say, oh my goodness, you're right. That should be probably our second priority. Thank you, Jessica. Now, I think that now that we have all those, here's how we should break them down and split them up. What do you all think? Am I missing anything? And then again, Bob is gonna say, oh, remember, we have to get that one thing approved by accounting first, so they need to be in on this. And it's like, oh my God, thank you, Bob. So this is what I mean. A lot of times as a leader, especially if you're the CEO, key executive owner, you think that people are going to give you feedback and challenge you, but you have to invite that in. Hey, tell me how I might be wrong. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what we can do better. And I promise you that's going to go a long way in creating that climate of trust and connection. Last thing I want you to think about is going beyond just sort of the team and one-to-one interactions is how do you create contact for people to genuinely connect in the workplace? So that could be, hey, once a month we do a group outing or activity. It could be, hey, in our big team meetings, we do an actual 10-minute, like thoughtful icebreaker where we get to know each other a little bit more personally. You could do a volunteering thing. So let's call it once a quarter, you take on a volunteer project as a team for a cause that people really feel passionate about. You could even just have an employee interest group. Hey, we've got a Slack channel and a monthly email goes out for veterans at our company or for people like a book club, like so many things. All I'm saying there is just create contact or reasons or structures for people to connect. All right. So there you have it. The first piece. How do you create the trust and connection and psychological safety necessary to be a top performing team? Well, you measure and assess it. You use that strategic vulnerability, asking questions, leading with curiosity, seeking feedback, and then you create those opportunities for connection. Now, let's talk about the second one here, shared commitment or that buy-in. So when we look at the psychological literature about what makes people satisfied and engaged and bought in at work, really there's 2 pieces under the shared commitment piece. People need to feel a sense of competence, okay? So they feel that they are valued and valuable and their contribution has an impact, and you want to give them a bit of autonomy, so a sense of ownership over the work. And so if you can get those 2 things, people own their success, they're not micromanaged, and they understand why their work is valuable, and they feel that they are valued for it, you're going to tap into so much more of that buy-in and shared commitment and motivation that pairs, like we said in our chart right here. Now, the simplest way I can put this, I remember when I was in management at this very large company, I had a tenured rep on my team. She'd been there for like 20 years, consistently highly successful, and she would always go above and beyond to serve the team and help me as a manager. She would step out of the operation to help these new people and answer questions. She would take time out of her day to train and onboard, and she would consistently step back and come to me with operational improvements and suggestions. And I remember in one of our monthly meetings, we're supposed to meet every month and review her dashboard. I basically just sent her an email like, look, we can meet on Zoom for 20 minutes and I can tell you how you did your thing again this month, but I'd rather just tell you, like, Sarah, like, you are such a rock star. Like, literally, think about this. Like, I look back over your entire history at this company, you've always been highly successful. And not only that, but I see you going above and beyond to give back, to onboard new people, to mentor people, to help me with the operation and the projects that don't necessarily show up in your performance dashboard. Like, we are so lucky to have you. Thank you. And she sort of, when I saw her in the office again, like was a little almost like emotional. And she's like, pulled me aside and basically was like, Jackson, I've been at this company like 20 some years. No supervisor has ever said anything like that to me. You know, how often we miss such obvious things in our organization. But what happened? I told her and I explained to her why she is valuable to me and to the team and to the end users. And I made her feel valued. And no wonder she felt that sense of competence and motivation and drive. You know, one other story that's not exactly the same, but a related note is I heard about a Google. They do something called 20% time. They say, hey, one day a week, our engineers just work on whatever you want. Now, I know that's a little extreme in a lot of cases, but you can probably imagine at your company, you can think of 5 different things that could be improved or done better, but you just haven't made time for them. I bet your employees, each one of them has so many pet peeves or things that they would love to do. They might even stay late and work on it for free because they just want it to get done. And so empowering people to take ownership, autonomy. Another story was a plant manager in Mexico who designed a new initiative that said any employee would keep 10% of the cost savings that they drove for the company if they came forward, proposed it, and took initiative to implement it. And in 1 year, there was a guy there who saved the company about $3 million. And so he walked away with $300,000. And you're thinking, oh my God, $300,000 to an employee? That's more than he would have made in like 5 years. Yes, but who kept the other 2.7 million? The company. So hear me on this. The actions you want to make sure you're taking as a leader and that your managers are taking. Again, it starts with measurement and assessment. So you can ask people, you know, hey, when's the last time you were giving positive recognition or feedback? Hey, from 1 to 10, how valued do you feel by the organization, by your team, and by your manager? Hey, do you feel that your development and advancement are supported? Do you feel that you're being micromanaged? Do you feel that you are confident and capable of executing your roles and you've been trained adequately? Do you feel ownership over your success? So again, you can just kind of talk to people about that or do a little 3 to 5 question survey and go from there. Then the actions you want to consider, okay? Catch people in the act of doing things right. Just like I shared in that example, so much of our systems and management, rightly so, are designed to catch people doing wrong. But how do we catch people doing right and reward them for that and communicate to them why they're valuable and make them feel valued? Then I want you to, wherever you can, encourage ownership of success and ownership of the work. This varies a lot from context to context, but try to avoid micromanaging. And try to give people, whether it's financial, whether it's time, or even if it's just, again, in how they approach projects and tasks, right? You're trying to set up results and outcomes for them in their role, support them and coach them, but then let them do the work on their own terms with flexibility, again, to the extent possible. If you have a sales team or a senior manager, that's gonna look different than if you have a brand new truck driver or something. Okay, so if your kind of head's maybe spinning a little bit, I'll give you the last thing. How do you put this all together into your busy schedule? If you are a senior leader or owner or executive, it's like, you know, I know this stuff's important, but how do I make time to like actually get the culture right in my organization and teams so that we are the best performing teams possible? I'm going to tell you, you need an hour a week. That's it. 1 hour per week. 1 hour per week. Can you give me that? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to spend about 30 minutes in that hour doing one thing to create psychological safety, that trust and that connection. So it could be you're just going to go have a coffee chat with someone. You're going to go ask someone on your team for feedback. What could I do better as a manager? You could go do a little icebreaker with a team. You could say, okay, actually, I'm gonna set aside next month, I'm gonna plan it out in my 30 minutes. After work, we're gonna do a 2-hour little team outing or event or something. Okay, 30 minutes, I'm gonna send a check-in email to each of my direct reports, and I'm gonna ask them to answer 3 questions. How are you doing? What can I do better as your manager? And what's your favorite thing about work? Like literally anything to build that trust and connection. Remember some of the principles I said: vulnerability, seeking feedback, asking questions, being curious, and creating opportunities to connect and help others connect. So there's your 30 minutes. Next 30 minutes, you're gonna do something to create shared commitment. So you're gonna step back and you're gonna think, well, how could I give someone more ownership or autonomy? Or how can I reward my employees for the successes they're helping to create? Or I'm gonna write a handwritten thank you note, or I'm gonna send 2 thank you emails, or I'm gonna jump on a Zoom with one of my senior reps and talk to them about how valuable they are and that I'm seeing their contribution. Something intentionally to create that shared commitment. If you just do those 2 things, 1 hour a week, I promise you that is so much of what you need to step out of the operations, get out of the weeds, get out of putting out fires, step back and say, I'm actually going to be more intentional about the culture I'm creating in my business. You're gonna go a very long way with that simple practice. And by the way, we've brought this into companies, and one of them was a small to mid-sized company in transportation. They saw about an 80% improvement in their operation. So that was an 80% reduction in their cost of claims, which was associated with operational issues and disruptions and recordables and accidents and safety issues. Led to a $3 million savings in their best year in profitability in the last 10 years. So, do I have everything here? I think I do. There you have it. Short checklist, 1 hour per week. That is how you create the highest performing teams possible in your business and organization. My name's Jackson Kirchis. I'm one of 2 partners at happinessmeansbusiness.com. You can check us out. Tons of free resources there. You can bring us in to do a keynote, a talk, a training, a workshop, a coaching, any of those things. Details are down below or on our website. On this channel, we share resources to help you as a leader create a culture of happiness and high performance in your business. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.